So, hello and welcome to our Lunch and Learn program on Vermont's butterflies. My name is Lisa Sawsville, and I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Coverts Woodlands for Wildlife. We are a statewide nonprofit organization that works to educate landowners and others about sound forest management and wildlife stewardship. Our goal is to connect people to the land, wildlife, and each other. We send out a weekly e-news, which you can register for on our website, www.vtcoverts.org, as well as make a donation there if you want to support our programming. And with that, and in the spirit of getting to know each other and fostering community, please type where you are from in the chat. And with that, I will introduce our speaker. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Kent McFarland. He's the co-founder of the Vermont Center for Ecostudies. Kent is a conservation biologist, photographer, writer, and naturalist. You may have even heard him on VPR, where he co-hosts Outdoor Radio. He is here today to talk to us about Vermont's butterflies and the Vermont Butterfly Atlas. So Kent, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. This is great. Good to see so many people. I have a feeling that everyone has spring fever, so they're like, butterfly talk, let's go. I know I have a little bit. If anybody's seen a butterfly yet already this year, please put it in the chat. I'm curious if anybody's seen a butterfly yet. I haven't seen anybody online yet that's seen a butterfly, but I have a feeling that today could be the day we see our first butterfly. Anyway, let me share some slides that get us started. And one second, sorry. There we go. Everybody's seeing my slides, I assume.
Yes.
Great. All right. My name's Kent McFarland, and I really love butterflies, and I hope a lot of you do too, and especially after this talk. I got involved in watching butterflies almost by accident. I'm actually a trained ornithologist, and most of my work professionally has been ornithology through the years. But while looking at birds and working with birds, I got super excited about butterflies as they're flying all around me. And I recall coming back to Vermont from a trip to Belize working on butterflies where there were butterflies all around me. And I really wanted to start watching butterflies in Vermont. And this is maybe back in, the mid 90s or early 90s. And I realized that there wasn't a whole lot known about butterflies in Vermont even then. And so I just sort of became a fanatic of watching butterflies. And decades later, I've been now working with butterfly conservation in Vermont and beyond, and helping everybody get involved in butterflies and helping us collect data. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about Vermont butterflies, their conservation, some of the natural history, and most importantly, I want to highlight like community science, aka citizen science. And there's probably people, I've saw some names on here, Terry Armada, I'll point some names out on here. Sorry to flag you, but people that have done so much for Vermont butterflies, for our knowledge, for conservation, and have joined me on butterfly atlases and sharing their data on either iNaturalist or eButterfly, which we'll talk about. And so without all that, in Vermont and beyond, honestly, we wouldn't really know that much about Vermont's butterflies, and we certainly would not understand their conservation status as well as we do now. So if you haven't contributed after today, I hope you get excited about contributing observations and studying butterflies. And if you have contributed, I'm really, really thankful that you're part of this butterfly watching community that we have here in Vermont. So with that, great. My slides are not working. Yes, they are. So I mentioned a little bit earlier that there's butterflies among us right now. Today, someone might even find one today, but we have this great tool at the Vermont House of Life at the Vermont Center for Ecostudies. If you go there for the Vermont Butterfly Atlas, and it's a flight chart. And every week you can look at the flight chart and sort it by what might be flying in Vermont then. And so I did this morning. I just went on here and sorted it. And so these 5 species popped up as being able to be seen today if it was nice weather. And it's beautiful weather here in Woodstock, and I'm sure it is everywhere else. It's going to get warm this afternoon. So here's a bunch of butterflies, and I bet some of you, if not all of you, have seen some of these. These are all woodland species, and the coolest thing about these 4 species is that they're always here all winter long. They overwinter as adults. They find a hollow log, a crack in the rocks, a hole in our wood pile. They're in our outbuildings. They're just hanging out all winter long, waiting for a day like today to come out and start to fly around and maybe do what's called puddling, which you'll see them on dirt roads or bare ground or even on some sap dripping out of a tree. They're licking it, trying to get after some nutrients to build up their fat stores and their energy again. So today, I will not be surprised if someone finds a morning cloak. That's the first one on the left-hand side, this one. And right now they're going to look a little tattered like this one. This was last year. They landed on a board right outside my door. In the summertime, the new ones will have this beautiful yellow rim on them, but now they've been spending the whole winter hanging out, so they're a little tattered. The next one is an eastern comma. Sort of looks like a flash of a fall leaf on the ground, and when it closes, you can't really see it because it blends right in, and it literally has a silver comma on the underside of its wings that you can see. And then one that's really cool is Compton's tortoiseshell in the middle here. And then my absolute favorite butterfly, Milbert's tortoiseshell with those cat's eyes and fire rims. So right now, this afternoon after this talk, you can go out, walk some back roads, look at some dirt and mud puddles. You're going to probably find some of these butterflies out and about. So right now we've got these 5 species, and of course, always the cabbage white. The ubiquitous cabbage white is out there too. So there's butterflies amongst us every year, every day of the year, and right now is the time to start to look for them. So here's the thing about butterflies and about insects in general. If you look at this chart on the right-hand side, the size of the circles are how many of those groups of species that we know exist in the world. And the dark blue, is how many we actually know through science. They're described. They have a name. And the light blue is actually what we think is still out there, undescribed by science. And so if you look at insects that rule the world, we know that there's about 5 million insects that we've just out there to be described, and we've only described 1 million of them so far. So we've only described 20% of the insects in the world so far. And you do not have to watch National Geographic or the Nature Show and go to Peru or some crazy location. You can find new species right here in Vermont. And last week, we had a new species described, a butterfly species described that's here in Vermont. And it's that tiger swallowtail right there that you see. And it's called the midsummer tiger swallowtail. Completely new to science, was flying around right under our noses all these years. And finally, someone took all the time to do the genetic work, do the studying of their biogeography and their morphology, and it's published and it's real now. It's a new species for Vermont, the midsummer tiger swallowtail. And so those early tiger swallowtails you see in May flying all over, those are Canadian tiger swallowtails. They're amazing. Sometimes some years they're flying everywhere. You probably see them in your garden. They're flying up dirt roads. They're puddling in masses on the dirt roads. But this species actually comes later. It comes in July, and you'll notice them in your yard sometimes because they're on your lilies sometimes. And it's long after the Canada tiger swallowtails are gone. This species comes out in July and only flies for a month. And for a long time, we've always wondered, like, what is this? What's this tiger swallowtail that's coming out now? It looks different. It acts different. And so finally, after all these years, a group of scientists got together, did all the work, and we have a new species for Vermont. So we're still discovering stuff right here in Vermont. And it's through help from community scientists. The work here has all kinds of photographs, sites, and all kinds of work done by community scientists to help figure out that this new species was among us. So everyone's helping us discover new things. So Lepidoptera, the order, that's part of the insects. If you look at this chart, here's Lepidoptera right here in the orange. It's one of the biggest groups of insects. Here's vertebrates, tiny little group in the world. Other invertebrates, plants and algae, but insects rule. And yes, beetles rule, but butterflies are much, much more cool. And there's about 150,000 butterfly and moth species in the world, we think. We don't really know how many there are. We're discovering new ones all the time. Most of those are moths. And in Vermont, for example, we have over 2,300 moth species known in Vermont. And we're discovering new moths every year. Last year, we discovered about 20 new moths for Vermont. And all those moths were discovered by people like you and me watching moths in their backyards using moth lights at night and taking pictures of them. So again, here's a whole nother group. If you're not watching butterflies of the day, you can watch moths at night. And so we're always discovering new species. I think we've discovered maybe 400 new butterflies for Vermont in the last decade or so, just by watching moths at our lights around our houses. So there's about 20,000 butterfly species in the world. And if you look at where they are in the world, there's about 725 species in North America. There's several thousand in other places, but look at South America. 8,000 species of butterflies in South America. That is the breadbasket of butterfly species. It's an amazing thing to go to the neotropics and watch butterflies. It's actually overwhelming. But here in North America, we have 725 species. And if we zoom into Vermont, back in 1995, we're standing on sort of the shoulders of giants that are among us. Michael Sabrin, Don Miller, Jim Hedbor, many others back in the 90s, and some of them still doing it today. Really, back in 1995, said, we don't really know how many butterfly and moth species we have in Vermont. So they put together this book of the checklist of Vermont's butterflies and moths. And then they went to as many sites as they could just amongst them. There wasn't that many of them watching butterflies. And they found between collections at museums like UVM and other places and going out to those sites you see on the map, they found 89 species in 1995, which is when I started kind of watching butterflies. Then I got really addicted to butterfly watching, and we did the first Butterfly Atlas in 2002 to 2007, where hundreds of volunteers, some of you right here listening to this helped. We went out for 6 years and we literally covered Vermont. You can see every one of those green dots in Vermont is a place where we did butterfly surveys. We literally covered Vermont for 7 years, studying butterflies, recording them, sharing them. And we came up with 108 species. We added a whole bunch of new species to Vermont. Fast forward now, since then, 2025, I can't believe it, but every 20 years we're trying to do this, but repeat this butterfly atlas. So right now we're repeating that butterfly atlas again. We're going out again, and you can see how many surveys we've done since the last butterfly atlas. It literally paints the map, the Vermont map with butterfly surveys, and now we're up to 119 species. Every one of those new species we keep finding again have been found by someone like you who is out watching butterflies and shares a picture of them. Sometimes they don't even know what they're finding, and we look at them and go, hey, that's a new species for Vermont. And some of those have become quite popular, like the eastern giant swallowtail. A gardener took a picture of the eastern giant swallowtail in their garden in 2010. Now that thing is found all over Vermont and it breeds here. It's North America's largest butterfly. It looks like a bat when it flies at you. And I can tell you, I'm on the local fire department, and I'm known as sometimes I'm going to take it as fondly. I'm fondly known as Butterfly Boy sometimes. And the first time I ever saw an eastern giant swallowtail, I was driving the fire truck and I got to a scene, and it was just an alarm and there was not much going on. I was standing outside the truck next to the fire chief and assistant chief, and I saw an eastern giant swallowtail flying down the parking lot, and it looked like a bird coming at me. And I couldn't help myself. I just exclaimed, "Oh my God, an eastern giant swallowtail flying at us!" And of course, the entire fire department turns and looks at me like, "What?" And then they all see this massive butterfly. If you've ever seen one, it's unbelievable, flying at us, and everyone watched it flutter past us and go by. And it was a pretty cool sight. So there's a lot of neat things to see. Now, because of all the data we've collected lately, we even know what areas in Vermont have more butterflies than others. And so about 50%, maybe even more, now about 58% of the species are found in all these biophysical regions, 8 of them in Vermont. So you can see all 8 regions. So a lot of butterflies can be found all over Vermont. They're really common, they're fairly common. You can find them anywhere you're in Vermont. But then there's a whole bunch of species, as you can see, that are only found in a few biophysical regions. They might be rare, they might need very specific habitats like bogs or certain sedge meadows or all kinds of things like that. And so they're scattered about some of these biophysical regions. The biggest winners in biophysical regions, the most species are down south in the Taconic Mountains and the southern Vermont Piedmont. Down in the southern Vermont has the most species up into the Champlain Valley. and the fewer species are up in the Northeast Kingdom, and in the northern Piedmont area here. But there's some specialty species here too. So, but we're getting to know even more and more, mainly because we have all this data. We have so much data now because there's so many butterfly watchers, that we have what 115,000 butterfly records now. Over 3,000 people have helped watch butterflies and learn about butterflies in Vermont now. We're up to 119 species. Look at that, 53,000 images of butterflies have been submitted to help us understand what's going on. So I encourage you again to jump in and be part of this. It's fun and learning about butterflies. And the way we do it is with these atlas schemes. And we started out with a breeding bird atlas, and then we did a bumblebee survey, and we also now we have these two butterfly atlases, and we use these blocks scattered around Vermont, and they're about 9 square miles, and we call these priority blocks. And they're scattered, there's 184 of them scattered all over Vermont, and they look sort of like this. You get a block like this, and what happens is you adopt one of these blocks if you're really going to help us with the atlas, and then you go out and survey it for 5 years and find out all the butterflies you can on one of these blocks. And that's how we get all this really rich data that allows us to do things like this, which is assign conservation ranks to them. Before we started these atlases, before the year 2000, we had no idea what to do for conservation ranks with most butterflies. And so now that we have all this data and we're continuing to collect data like this, thanks to folks like you, we're able to do conservation status ranks and start to understand which species really need help, which species are common, which species are rare, what habitats they're using. And so now we've got these ranks, they're called state ranks. We've got a few historic extinct species that are from the state that have been long gone. But we have 14 species that are critically imperiled. 23% of the butterflies are vulnerable or less in state ranks. So about a quarter of the species are of some serious concern. And every 10 years, the state, with help from folks like us, complete a wildlife action plan. Every state does this every 10 years. The last one was in 2015. And right now we're writing the 2025 wildlife action plan. And it features species of greatest conservation need, which this year now, in the new plan 2025, there's 20 species of greatest conservation need. Those are ones that we really want to focus on learning more about, understanding how we can better conserve them, and help their populations along. And all this is because of all that data that everyone helps us collect by watching butterflies and sharing them. So here's the species of greatest conservation need. They're sort of in three basic groups. There's 5 species that are in grasslands and shrublands. And, they're not grasslands and shrublands that you think of out in the Midwest, maybe, but they're more, they're Vermont style grasslands. And by that, they may actually be something like the verge along I-91. The verge along I-91 in southern Vermont has several rare butterflies that really are only along I-91, because they're mowed sort of grassland-like fields that have special species for these butterflies. But it also may be meadows that you have on your property. It could be old fields. It could be that you brush hog maybe once every few years or something. It could be meadows within your woodlands. It's these places where you find some of these grassland and shrubland species. And one of them you'll see on there is monarch, which, I feel like monarch, I can usually find it in Vermont. It doesn't seem like it's terribly uncommon in the summertime. But the problem with the monarchs is that over the last 25 to 30 years, it's declined by about 80 or 90% in the eastern monarch population. And the only way it comes back to Vermont every year is when it migrates back to Vermont. So what happens everywhere with monarchs affects our monarchs here in Vermont. So right now they're proposed to be listed as federally threatened. It wouldn't do much to what we do here in Vermont other than to pay more attention to how we manage our milkweed fields a little bit better. But monarch is one that stands out there that a lot of us could do something about. The next group far to the right are a bunch of wetland species. They tend to be in places that most people don't want to go. You have to get wet. So bog elfin, which we only recently discovered a couple of years ago in one bog in Vermont. Bog coppers is another one, and then a bunch of species that are really only in old beaver sedge meadows, large beaver sedge meadows, places that are really tough to get around in. And then the one I want to focus on a little bit more today are forests, which, most of Vermont is forests. And it turns out there's a bunch of species that really rely on forests. And several of them we can deal with ourselves. The first two is West Virginia white and early hair streak, and I'm going to go into those in depth in a second. They were really reliant on hardwood forests, specific kinds of hardwood forests. But two that we discovered in the first butterfly atlas that were never known to be in Vermont, but now we know are in bottomland forests, are hackberry emperor and tawny emperor. And those are found along in riverine bottomland forests where there's hackberry trees. And so maybe the bottom half of the Connecticut River Valley from Brattleboro up to White River Junction. And then in the Champlain Valley, you can find them along a lot of the rivers and the lake in the Champlain Valley where there's hackberry. And so they're hackberry specialists. And, riverine bottom forests aren't doing as well as they could be in some places. And then two specialists, Edwards hairstreak, Henry's elfa, and those are really special butterflies that are only in really rare forests in Vermont that most of us won't deal with. And then two other species that really are kind of an enigma right now is silvery checker spot and pink edge sulfur. Pink edge sulfur is up in the Northeast Kingdom, and its population seems to be declining, and we don't know enough about it. And silvery checker spot used to be kind of common in the Northeast and has declined rapidly. We haven't seen a silvery checker spot in Vermont since 2005. And some work in Maine suggests that they might actually start to be changing the host plant, the plant that their caterpillars like to feed on. And they might be actually using old skidder roads a lot now. So this is something that we really want to look into a little bit more for silvery checker spot, because that tells me that it might be something we can manage together using better forestry practices or different forestry practices. But I want to focus in on two species that are really interesting that I think are they're really dependent on forests, and in Vermont they might be dependent on Vermont to actually have very good populations into the future too. And they're probably found in some of our woodlands. So West Virginia white and early hair streak, I'm going to zero in on those two to sort of get a taste for the natural history of these butterflies and what it takes to get to know what they need for their annual cycle. What we're going to find out about with a lot of butterflies that are of conservation concern is that we actually have to really understand the detail of their natural history in order to understand how to manage them. And in some cases, we only know a little bit about their natural history. We don't know the dirty details about it. And so that's another place where, again, observations from community scientists are really helping. So let's look about West Virginia white. This butterfly, it's about to fly. This thing, if all of you probably are like me, you can't wait for spring wildflowers. It's like the most amazing thing for me after a long winter in Vermont is when the snow disappears out of the forest and before leaf out, we have these spring ephemeral wildflowers that just all of a sudden come zooming up in our forest. And I can't get enough of them. I'm walking around in the forest in the springtime trying to find these wildflowers. I photograph the same things every year thinking I'm getting better pictures, but they're always the same. Watching these most amazing flowers, and they're only there for a little bit. As soon as the canopy closes over them, they disappear, and they're gone. And then it gets dark in the forest, and there's not as many flowers there anymore. Well, the West Virginia white butterfly is the same thing. It's a spring ephemeral butterfly. It's just like those spring ephemeral wildflowers. It only flies when the snow leaves until the leaf out happens in the forest. And it only likes really a certain kind of hardwood forest. It likes really rich hardwood, northern hardwood forests in Vermont, which are the places that are really great for watching spring wildflowers too. And their host plant, this is the plant that the caterpillars feed on, they lay their eggs on. In Vermont are two species. They're toothworts. The cutleaf toothwort on your left here, and on the right, the two-leaf toothwort. And two-leaf toothwort I find all over the place in Vermont. This cutleaf toothwort I find less so and more in southern Vermont. And it turns out that this butterfly, as you can see with this phenology chart, this is all from people turning in observations of this thing. It's going to come out in the first week of April down in southern Vermont, and it'll fly until almost June, maybe into June, and then it's gone. It disappears. it disappears the same way that these plants disappear. So these two plants come out the same way, and they have to quickly get everything done. They have to flower, and then they have to go to seed, and then they just disappear. They actually, after that, when the forest gets dark, they'll go back underground. And so this butterfly, the West Virginia white, has to act the same speed. It has to go as fast as these flowers. So it has to come out of its chrysalis, mate, lay eggs on these plants. The eggs have to hatch, and the eggs, they have to start to feed to get to a certain size before these plants go wilt and go away for the season and go back into underground into dormancy. And then the butterfly will be dormant too, and they all die off. And so we're talking about what, a 5 week period or less for this butterfly to get everything done on this plant. The interesting thing is they feed on the plant, but they also nectar, and they actually uh, pollinate the plants too. And so they just, even though they're feeding on the plant and maybe destroying some of the leaves, they're also beneficial for the plant because they're always nectaring and pollinating these two plants too. So they have this sort of, I guess, a good bad relationship going on here. So where is the thing? So it's found basically only in the eastern United States and southern Canada. It's mainly found in these rich hardwood forests in the upper Midwest, and then down the Appalachian chain, up into New England and up into just the southern part of Quebec and Ontario. But here's the thing. Last week, a really important report came out in Science, and you may have heard a little bit in the press, but it didn't get as much press as it should have. But it was a massive study looking at butterfly populations from the year 2000 to the year 2020 across the United States using, maybe 30 or 40 community science and science programs that have been monitoring butterflies all over the place. And one of the biggest declining species was this species, the West Virginia white. And it's declined in this 20-year period 98%. That's 2% per year it's been declining. It's virtually disappearing from a lot of these areas you see on this map. And you can see in Vermont, if we zoom in a little bit, it's mostly found in the upper Champlain Valley, and then down in the southern part of Vermont up into maybe Rutland. I don't understand this gap right here in the Champlain Valley, why there's none there, other than it could be there's not enough the right kind of forest there. But it's really, really strongly found in southern Vermont. You go into any northern hardwood forest that has rich soils in southern Vermont in April, and you're going to find West Virginia whites. And here's the interesting thing about it is that that study that found a 98% decline didn't have very good data from Vermont contributing to it. And so I have a suspicion that right now in southern Vermont, maybe in parts of the Champlain Valley, that we probably have maybe some of the best populations, the most stable populations for West Virginia white, maybe in the world. So it's a big responsibility, perhaps now and into the future, for us in conserving West Virginia white. So what's going on with it? Why is it declined 98%? Well, the biggest one is loss of forest and forest fragmentation. It turns out this butterfly, like us maybe in some respects, it hates to leave the forest. If you cut a forest block and have fields all around the forest block, it can't go to another forest. They never will leave the canopy. Their behavior will not allow them to go out in the open. They never go out in the open. They always stay under a canopy of forest. And so once you start fragmenting forests, more and more and more, you start isolating the populations, then they're susceptible to going to being extirpated in some of these things. And there may be still mid 19th century effects we're seeing from some of that deforestation, even in Vermont, where we fragmented the forests all up, and it really could have affected the species a lot, just because it never will leave the canopy. The other big thing is climate change, which I'm going to talk about. And with that, there's early canopy closure, which I'm going to show you about, but it's also weird weather. You get weird spring weather where it might get too cold, or it might warm up super fast and make the host plants die back more quickly. And so when you have this bouncing around weird weather in the spring, And if you have too many in a row of that, then it can have a big effect on populations. And then the biggest one we have really is garlic mustard. Probably a lot of you know about garlic mustard, an invasive species, first introduced, I think, in Long Island back in the 1800s. Um, you can find it all on our roads. It's in my backyard. Unfortunately, sometimes it comes in on forestry equipment, maybe, and gets spread back through forest landings sometimes, and gets into deeper into the forest that way. But the big deal about it is that it has some of the similar chemicals in it as does the toothwort. And so when West Virginia whites land on this, they actually taste with their feet. So they prick the leaf and they have little taste sensation sensors in their feet. And they feel like garlic mustard is the right place to lay an egg. And they lay an egg on it. And as soon as that caterpillar hatches out of the egg and starts to eat it, the garlic mustard has a poison in it that kills them. And so the garlic mustard is a trap. It attracts these butterflies into laying their eggs on it, yet it kills the caterpillars right off the bat. And so as this spreads deeper and deeper into the forest, it's more and more West Virginia white populations are exposed to it. It becomes a population problem. But here's a real kicker that's happening, and that's sugar maple leaf out. This is from Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest over in New Hampshire, beginning in the 1980s, monitoring complete leaf out of sugar maples in the forest. Well, it's changed by about 2.1 days per decade. It's getting earlier and earlier and earlier. And so we're getting, even though the snow is melting faster, the plants are not actually coming up as fast. They're still coming up about the same time, but leaf out is occurring much earlier. And so there's fewer amount of days for those plants, those toothwort plants and the butterfly to have no leaf out, to have sun on them. And so the plants are going into senescence earlier, and so are the butterflies. And as this happens more and more and more with climate change, it's going to get to a point where the window is too small for West Virginia whites to complete the life cycle in that short little ephemeral period in the springtime. So really, it's a real crunch for them when it comes to climate change over time. And we've done some work looking at mapping now and into the future, and you can see here the blue is where we predict now and into the future with climate change. So we're actually looking pretty good in Vermont. Um, the range is staying pretty steady in Vermont, if not creeping a little bit northward. But we really have to do other things here to keep those populations healthy and good in Vermont here. And so we're having a lot of people go out and survey these areas to help us make sure and find out if we have more up here than we actually know, how far east are they up in the northern part of Vermont actually, and then what are the changes in the future that are happening with that. And then the second butterfly that's a woodland specialist that I just wanted to highlight today is one that I rarely see. It's really hard to see. West Virginia white, super easy to see. Get yourself in April to a rich hardwood forest and you're going to find West Virginia whites. Early hair streak, it's really quite difficult. It's a unique little butterfly and it's beautiful. You can see that even the underside is gorgeous, but the upper side, if you ever get to look at it, which is hard because they hardly ever see it, this is a museum specimen, is this amazing sort of blue purple sheen. It's unbelievable. And once again, it's an early butterfly. It flies in May and June, sometimes has a second flight out into July. But here's the crazy thing about it. It's mostly a canopy species. It may be more common than we think, but it's always up in the canopy and it's always in beech forests. It's a American beech specialist. And most of you might be cringing right now because you know that American beech isn't doing so well. Well, only recently have we figured this out. The males stay way up in the canopy of the beech trees and they wait for females to mate with. And then they actually lay an egg on the shell of the outer shell of the beech nut. And that egg then hatches and they start to feed on that shell until it gets to be a little bit bigger of a caterpillar. And then they bore into the seed and feed on the seed. And they won't feed on the leaves like other butterflies. They only will feed on the husk. And then as they get older, on the seed. And only on American beech and sometimes one other species, but not beaked hazelnut, but not very often. So that's a problem. And the reason is because, well, let me show you the range first. I'm getting ahead of myself. The range of it is, if you look at it, it's a lot like West Virginia white. It's in the eastern United States. It's a lot of them in Vermont, and then the whole way down the Appalachian Range, you'll find this species, and you'll find it basically if we put a map of American beach over that, you find it where American beach is. But here's the problem: a lot of us know. The first one is beach bark disease, which I'm sure all of you cringe when you walk your forests and see all this on your beech trees. We get beech snap, and our beech trees look horrible. They're all gnarled up. Um, they're dying. Recent study found what 28% of large beech trees were dead in some of these stands they were looking at, and of course they resprout. They're amazing sprouters, and sometimes to our chagrin, they sprout like crazy. But the problem is that this beech bark disease keeps attacking the older trees and knocking them back, knocking them down, and then they get root sprouts again. And what happens is fewer and fewer trees then are actually fruiting. And if they're not fruiting, then there's nothing for early hair streaks because early hair streaks only use the fruit to feed on. And so we can see ourselves getting into this vicious cycle now where we have large stands of beech, but not very many of them are fruiting. It's a huge problem for this species and causing it to decline rapidly. And now we have the new partner in town, beech leaf disease, which we knew was coming. And as you can see from the map that I just downloaded today, it's coming into Vermont quickly. I was in a stand last year in Rhode Island of beech trees, and that was heavily infested with beech leaf disease. And it was horrible. It was very bad. And so now, if beech doesn't have enough problems, now we have this one, and caused by a nematode apparently. And I just heard last week that now they're suspecting that the nematode might be being transported in the wind. That's, of all things, the wind be transporting these. So it's going to probably spread fast. So it's a problem for this species. So those are two examples of sort of two species that are getting the hard knock here all over their range. But here in Vermont, maybe less so. And maybe we can do stuff to keep them having really good populations, a core population here in Vermont, even though they're doing so poorly elsewhere, if we work at it. But the study I mentioned before that came out last week, looking at the butterflies across the nation, there's a 22% decrease in the total number of butterflies counted in those 20 years. So a quarter of the butterflies, if you started watching butterflies in the year 2000 and you're watching butterflies now, there's a quarter less butterflies you're seeing, which is a lot. But the other thing I want to point out here too is that this study, this is all they had available to them on this map, for monitoring. And so we've been trying hard to do more monitoring with more people, like the Butterfly Atlas, like eButterfly, which I'm going to talk about, like using iNaturalist to do repeated counts. But you can see up here in Vermont, they didn't have a whole lot of data from Vermont to use. There just isn't a whole lot of repeated data, which we're trying to change. And so, although this average of 22% across the country is alarming, maybe we're doing a little bit better in Vermont. Well, they did break it down a little bit. And so you can see here, they broke it down in sections of the country. And here we are in the Northeast at the bottom. And overall in the Northeast, we have a lot of species declining. We have over half of our species were found to be declining over the last 20 years. The annual change is somewhere around just under 1% annual change, which added up 1% every year, keep adding up. That's a lot. And then even species richness, the number of species that you find in the Northeast and elsewhere, in year 2000 versus 2020 has dropped significantly. So we go out butterfly watching, we're going to find less species. Um, this is only, again, because we have a bunch of community science across the nation doing this, but we need more in Vermont so we can understand species by species what's going on and figure out what we can do about correcting some of these populations and keeping these beautiful butterflies flying around all the time. And so everyone asks me, like, well, okay, all these butterflies are declining across the nation and probably in Vermont too. Why? And I mean, my best answer really is it's a death by a thousand cuts. There is so much going on when you start listening, and it really depends on the species. And this is why we need to understand species by species, not just like Butterflies are declining. We need to know which species are declining and then really dig into it and study and figure out why they're declining and see if we can reverse that trend. When we do that with butterfly species, and we've done that across the nation with a bunch of species, when we dig into them, figure out their natural history and why they're declining, we've recovered a whole bunch of butterfly species doing it that way. And so it seems intimidating when you look at it because it really is a death by a thousand cuts when you look at the whole group of butterflies and insects in general. It's everything from urbanization to, forest loss to storms to fires to agricultural pesticides misuse to you name it. You just keep listing it and it feels overwhelming. But when we start to understand, when we all group together and start to understand which species are declining and then dig into why they're declining and figure out the real reasons they're declining, we're able to do stuff about it. We're able to change some of our management ways and get things done. So that keeps me hopeful about butterflies and butterfly conservation. And so I really encourage you if you don't watch butterflies to start watching them. You don't have to be nuts about it. You don't have to, you can be crazy like um, the folks in the top of the picture with nets and binoculars and cameras, and that's me, I admit it. And it's a lot of fun and it's recreational, but it's also helping conservation and science. But you can also do the same thing if you just whip out your phone and take a picture of butterflies you see and share them to either iNaturalist or eButterfly. I have a feeling that when you start doing that, you're going to start getting more and more addicted to watching butterflies. And you can do this in your backyard. You can do it in your local meadow. You can do it on your hike. It's nothing special. It's just noticing the butterflies, getting a picture of them, sharing it so we can use it in order to start monitoring these things. And there's a lot of resources we have on the Vermont Atlas of Life for you. There's tons of online resources for learning how to ID butterflies and do butterfly watching. The best guide right now is this Swift guide for butterflies for North America. It's amazing. It's teaches you how to watch butterflies through binoculars and learn, just like with birds, learn what the field marks are. It's actually pretty easy. But the other cool thing is that we have a lot of technology now with eButterfly and iNaturalist, where as long as you take a picture of it, and then sometimes it can be a terrible picture, as long as you take a picture of it, we have developed really good models using computer vision that helps ID them and give you a hint at what it might be. And then we have a huge group of butterfly watchers in Vermont and beyond that'll physically look at your picture and help you ID it too. And so even if you put a butterfly up on one of those sites that says, I don't know what this is, it's a butterfly. If it's IDable, people will start to ID it and they'll help you learn how to do this, people like me. So the second Butterfly Alice is going on right now. We started it in 2023. It's going to 2027. Hundreds of people are helping us find and map butterflies across Vermont. And you can be really into it, like some of you on this call right now, and adopt a survey block and spend a couple of years surveying this block near where you live. Or you can just be hiking, like I said, and snap a few pictures with your smartphone and put them on the site, and that's also helping. So there's a way for everyone of all ages, all abilities to help us monitor and find butterflies across Vermont and beyond. Um, and so you can go. This is a lot of text here, but I just show you. There's really just 4 steps. They're like you join eButterfly or iNaturalist. You decide how you're going to monitor butterflies, whether you're just going to adopt a priority block, go on a road trip, or just like kick around and find incidental observations. You find a place to butterfly watch, literally anywhere. I mean, honestly, you could walk a road, you can go into a meadow, you can use your own garden. And then you just grab your gear and go. And the gear you want to do for butterfly watching, in a nutshell, all you really need is your eyes and something to take a photo of if you want to share it. If you're really into it, close focusing binoculars, they're actually really cheap now. They're under $100. You can get close focusing binoculars. And by close focusing, I mean like you can focus on your shoelaces on your shoe. If you start to use close focusing binoculars to watch butterflies and other insects, it's going to blow your mind. It's going to open a whole new world. It's like watching birds, but they're right at your feet. And it's really amazing to start to watch them closely that way. And then if you're really into it, sometimes you need a net if you're really surveying butterflies, so you can catch them to quickly ID them and let them go. For some that are difficult to ID. But it's really available for anyone to do at any level they want to do. And we welcome all levels. Like if you are just putting in common butterflies to your yard or chasing down rare ones, we don't care. It all helps us figure out what's going on with butterfly populations in the state. So we have this site on eButterfly for the Butterfly Atlas. We've already found in 2 years 100 species. 133 people have helped us do it, and so we've got 100 out of the 119 species we've already that have ever been known in Vermont. We've already found and photographed in Vermont. So every one of those checklists is counts of butterflies, and the counts allow us to over time to monitor the butterflies and understand what their populations are doing. And it's all easy to use online, and there's apps to use. And it's just there's really basically 3 steps to e-butterfly. It's you put down like, where'd you butterfly? You just zoom in to where you did and you click it and you put a dot down where you butterflied. It's probably a field near your house, or it was a walk over in a park, or wherever it was. Step 2 is like, how did you butterfly? Well, I just happened to see a butterfly and I wanted to share it. Well, that's an incidental sighting. Or maybe you were actually keeping track of how far you walked. I walked, a quarter of a kilometer, a quarter of a mile on this road. That's a traveling survey. Or I don't know, I butterflied for 60 minutes. That's a time count. It's all pretty easy. You fill in the date, the time, how many people you did it with, and then boom, you go to the next step. Step 3, a card pops up for each butterfly. You literally pop a card up by clicking add a species. How many did you see of them? Well, I didn't count them. Okay, just put an X in there. Well, I counted them. There was 14 monarchs. Put a 14 in there, put monarch in here. I took pictures. You put your pictures on here. You upload your pictures. As soon as you upload your pictures, you're going to get this, which is our computer vision. And you can say, yeah, can you help me ID this thing? And it'll immediately go, and our models will look at the picture, and you can even zoom in on the picture better, and it'll give you the percentage of what it thinks. So this was a mustard white that I put up there, which looks an awful lot like West Virginia whites. But these are much more common all over Vermont. And so immediately it says, yep, this is a mustard white. We're 72% sure. And you can just click that and say, fine. And then someone like me will come in and help verify it. So even if you don't know your butterflies, if you take even a crummy picture sometimes, the computer vision will do it for you. It's an unbelievable tool to help you learn how to ID butterflies and contribute to science and conservation. So there's a lot of butterflies out there. There's some flying right around you right now. Um, and I'm hoping that some of you sort of got a little bit of the butterfly bug in you now, if you haven't already. And maybe if you have to work after lunch now, maybe you play hooky instead and try to find some butterflies this afternoon, and join eButterfly or iNaturalist and start adding your butterfly sightings and helping us understand their conservation better across Vermont. This is sort of a quick overview of butterflies, sort of maybe just to wet your whistle. I will tell you that next week we have an actual webinar scheduled for the Butterfly Atlas to explain the atlas in detail and how you can join it. And then at the end of April, we have a Q&A session for butterflies webinar. And we have all kinds of field trips planned and things like that for training. So if you hit our site, the Vermont Atlas of Life, and go to the Butterfly Atlas project on there, all of our events are listed there, and ways in how you can join the Atlas and start enjoying and sharing your butterfly sightings with us to help with conservation. So with that, I've gone on long enough. I'm happy to stay here for hours and answer questions. Fire away if you want.
That sounds great, Kent. Thanks so much for all of that. It was amazing. I learned a lot, and I have a couple questions while other people are going to start typing questions into the chat box. So my first question is with the early hair streak.
Yeah.
So we know that the beach kind of put out flushes of nuts like every other year. Has there been any tying with their population? I know we know so little, but I mean, just out of curiosity, is that, we know it affects the bear population. Does it also affect this early hair streak?
Well, we don't have very good data for that, but I'm pretty sure right now you and I could draw a figure that would have that every other year cycle, the bear cycle with it, and then put in the hair streak cycle right alongside it, and they'd all follow each other the same way. Um, we just don't have very good data for that, but I'm certain if we did that as our hypothesis and went out and tried to get that data, we'd be right. Like they absolutely are following beach mast for sure. Yeah.
All right, great. And I also loved your slide on death by a thousand cuts. You could have put, butterflies in there. You can put almost any species, any forest type, any, in there. And it's so true. Like our trees, right? They can handle an insect, but then they get beech leaf disease, and then they get, and
Yeah.
that then affects the cascading effect. So it was a great slide. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right, so Kathy wants to know if butterflies migrate, where do they go before and after they appear?
That's a great question. Butterflies. So just like birds, some butterflies migrate, some sort of migrate, and some don't migrate at all. And so the photos I showed you right off the bat of those four species, they really don't migrate at all. They're real Vermonters. They hang out here all winter long. They suck it up. But then there's a group of species that actually do migrate out of here and come back every spring. Things like question mark, red admiral, painted lady, American lady, all these big gaudy butterflies that we see in the summertime in our gardens. They actually only are in Vermont because they come back. They leave and come back. Not the same individual like a bird. Um, it's a multi-generational cycle, but they go somewhere and come back. A lot of them we actually don't know where they go, and we don't know how they come back. It's like in the infancy of studying that type of migration, those bursts of migration. And then there's those that we know migrate and go do something very specific like monarchs, which is not usual for butterflies, which I'm sure everyone kind of knows or knows enough that the monarchs here in August and September are the ones that are flying the whole way to Mexico. And I've had tags on butterflies from Vermont be found in Mexico. So we physically know they do that from tagging. And then they come back as far as right now they're coming back, but they only go as far as the Gulf Coast approximately, where they end up mating and die. And then their young go further north, and then their young go further north and end up in Vermont at the end of May or June. Then we have a summer monarch here that never leaves Vermont and is only here. And then the late summer monarch, that's the one back in July, August, and September, which is going to fly the whole way back to Mexico. So that's a multi-generational cycle. But the difference with that one is it's going to a very specific place in Mexico in the mountains versus these other butterflies I mentioned, like red admirals, painted ladies. We don't really know where they're going. They go somewhere and enjoy their life in the south and then come back to the north in the summer, but we don't really know what they're up to.
Okay, here's a great question on helping with identification and getting involved with citizen science. If I post the same photo to iNaturalist and eButterfly, will it get counted twice? iNaturalist has a pollinator project that they add to, so there's a
Yeah.
question there.
That's a question I get a lot because there's multiple projects going on. Like they said, there's a pollinator project they're working on iNaturalist, but they want to contribute to eButterfly. Um, and the difference is so iNaturalist is basically, and I use both. And iNaturalist is a project that captures anything anywhere in the world, any living organism in the world, including butterflies. But it's really what we call a presence only project. It's like I saw this butterfly at this spot at this time, and I took a picture of it. And it's amazing data. We get so much data through there, and it's unbelievable. But it usually doesn't have counts, and it's just like that was there at that time. And we may add things to it, like it was on this flower and other really important stuff, but it usually doesn't have counts. What eButterfly tries to do is create a site that captures all the counting and the effort involved, and so we can look at population change in a lot greater detail with a lot better statistical power when we use eButterfly. And so it really encourages people to actually say like, okay, well, I saw this butterfly there, but I saw seven of them, and I was out there for an hour. And so it tries to capture all that information in there so we can look at population change in much more detail. And so to get to answer the question, like, does it matter if I put it on both sites? It doesn't. They will all be shared to what's called the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which the Vermont Life is part of, and we actually deduplicate everything. So if we actually go through and find out like, oh, you saw that butterfly there at that exact same time, like we're not going to count it twice. And often it, like I said, it'll be different kind of data anyhow. It'll just be like, oh, it was just there versus another, and which can be fine for some analyses, but if we might want the count, so we'll use the one that has the count. So you can feel free to post it on any and all platforms you want to, and leave it up to the scientists and the data experts to clean up the data before they analyze it. It's no problem.
Good to know. Very good to know. So the next question wants to know, it's going to tap into your photography skills. What's the trick to get the photo of that really flittery butterfly that won't settle down?
Yeah. Patience. No, there's a couple of things you start to learn. One is like if you can approach the butterfly from behind, they actually see much better out in front of them and a little bit behind them and a little bit above them and terribly behind them. And so if you crouch down and come from behind them, you're probably going to get closer to them when they're resting, for one thing. If they're flitting around, chasing him to photographing him is usually useless. Like I try to, especially if I'm with someone else, like I think Ann Suoko's on this call. I think I saw her name. She and I, but we butterfly together a lot, and it'll often be like, "Oh, there goes. I got it. I'm following it. It's by here. Nope, I lost it. No, I'm still on it." And then you can keep doing that until you see where it landed, and then creep up on it. If you try to chase one down, it's almost always um, not fruitful for photographing them, even for catching them if you need to catch them to look at them closely. And so it's really about it really is about patience. But the third thing is it's also knowing about each butterfly's behavior. And when you start to watch them, you actually get sort of their that species behavior or maybe their personality in a way. And some of them are highly territorial. So if they go fluttering about, they often will come back to the same spot and perch. And so if you start watching that, you realize like, they're always going to land on that rock or they're always going to land on that stick, and you can position yourself to be in a better position for when they come back around if you're really still and they land again. So a lot of the things like some of the like Eastern comma is really territorial. So today, this afternoon, if you flush one off of a road, if you just stand still, that thing will circle back around and land on the road probably right where it was before. They're really territorial. But it can be really frustrating, but maybe that's part of the lure of it too, is not always being able to capture the best picture and always after it. The only thing I would say too is like I take pictures from really far away that are really crummy as I'm creeping up on things or trying to get them, because even crummy photographs can be ID'd species and be valuable for science. So they're not pleasing to our eye, but they're great help for science. So
Great. All right, a couple more questions, then we're going to have to say good afternoon. Anne actually, Suoko is asking a question. Is it known how site an individual plant that specific generations of butterflies are? So is it known how site-specific generations of butterflies are?
oh, so like yeah, I don't think so. And I'd be surprised if yeah, there's nothing known about that. I don't know. Yeah. It'd be interesting to know, but
That's
yeah.
good. All right, I have a point that someone shared I want to make sure to share with the group, and then a question. So the first point is Mike shares that I sometimes have luck photographing flittery butterflies by taking a video with the phone and then finding a good still to capture from that video. So that's a
Yes.
great idea.
Yes, I do that too, and I should have mentioned that. It's a really great way to do it. And then you just have to steal a frame out of it, the best frame out of it. It's a great way to do it.
So soon we'll have a how to use your iPhone to photograph wildlife class coming up, I think.
I mean, it's an important topic because so many of us are using them. I mean, my phone they're always in our pockets, whether that's good or bad. And for me, it's like a little I don't know, for those of you old enough to have watched Star Trek, it's like a tricorder, right? It's like it tells me everything. If I don't know the butterfly right on the spot, it's going to tell me what it is. So they're pretty amazing devices to be having in the field. So yeah, I think it's an important topic.
Great Star Trek reference. I love it. So my last question is sort of following up with particularly butterflies, driving the roads, right? You often hit them when they're flying about. Is there any recommendation? I read Crossing, by Ben Goldfarb, and we're talking about, it's the moving fence, right? They don't know how to cross it because we're moving so fast. Any
Yeah.
thoughts, recommendations, planting near roads? Is that, against it, for it?
I'm fine with planting by roads because some of the roadways, like that's the only place that the habit that's available to them. There's a really rare butterfly called the dusted skipper that I sort of mentioned that is only along I-91 down in the first three exits of I-91. So do they get hit by cars? I'm sure they get hit by cars, but they're still there. So I'm fine with planting along roads. It is a bit of a concern, and I think there's probably right for studying how we can do it better on roads and to reduce roadkill, because it can be a lot sometimes. And there's been studies of folks that have repeatedly walked roads to find out the level of roadkill of butterflies and bees, like bumblebees, and it's staggering amounts. Um, but they are insects, so they can often withstand staggering amounts in some cases. So I don't know. I think that's an intriguing line of inquiry that we should do is dealing with how we could mitigate roadkill. I'm writing that down. This is a great study.
All right, it sounds good. Count me in. We've got a couple things to continue to talk about, Kent.
Yeah.
All righty, everybody. We've run to the end of our hour. I want to thank you all for joining us. Kent, thank you for a very fun and informative talk on butterflies of Vermont. I'm sure you've interested a few more people in participating in the Butterfly Atlas. And we'll look at maybe creating a field trip so we can go out in the field and learn some of these skills.
I'm
So
in.
watch
Let's do
for
it.
that.
Yes. Great.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks, Lisa.